Welcome again. Here we have another stream from this small COVID-free bubble in southern Vermont, the Marlborough Festival. This will be the last of my streams from Marlborough, because after this week I'll be returning to New York and to virtual life for at least a little while longer. I hope for just a little while longer, I must say. I begin today's stream with a quotation from Albert Einstein, the great physicist, who said, "Most people say that it is the intellect which makes a great scientist. They are wrong. It is character. Without character, science is doomed." And why do I mention that, aside from the fact that it is actually a wonderful quote? It has to do with an article I read in Wired a little while ago, but I haven't talked about it. And this has to do with what is called the 5-micron threshold. And this is something which this article states, and makes a actually quite convincing case, caused actually an incorrect response to the COVID-19 epidemic, or pandemic, I would say. And I'll explain very quickly, and though for those of you who want something in more detail, this article from Wired should be quite easily found. It centers around a researcher, Lindsay Marr, who's an aerosol scientist at Virginia Tech University, and one of the very few, as according to this article, who studies infectious diseases. And she thought that this new coronavirus could actually hang in the air and travel in an aerosol. I'll explain what that is. Aerosols actually linger in the air, and small particles can actually become sort of trapped in these little, basically kind of like bubbles that linger in the air, and then can be breathed in by people, in fact, even at great distances. But what should I say? But the major organizations, scientific organizations, the CDC, the WHO especially, they were convinced that there was a threshold of only 5 microns, very small, that a particle could actually, the size could be from the particle. I'm sorry, I'm saying this very well. In order to be transmitted via aerosols, that's right. Now, this Lindsay Marr thought that this cannot be true. He said that the physics is actually wrong about that. And he was wondering how this 5-micron threshold came to be. And it turns out that this was a misunderstanding from a long time ago, from the studies of tuberculosis and how tuberculosis is transmitted. And that studies found that the tuberculosis that's were actually the particles or bacteria that creates it, that cause tuberculosis, were actually 5 microns or smaller. And what it was important about that is that let me read this actually. It says that tuberculosis, according to this article as I'm reading, is a curious critter. It only invades a subset of human cells in the deepest reaches of the lungs. Most bacteria, viruses, etc., are more promiscuous in a certain sense. They can embed in particles of any size and infect cells anywhere in the respiratory tract. That's why if you have a cold, it gets through your nose and it infects your nose, and then you get a sore throat, etc., etc. Now, the actual threshold, or sort of size and weight, let's say, of a particle being able to be transmitted in aerosol, turns out to have been calculated many years ago at 100 microns, not 5. But what happened was that the study from tuberculosis was actually, as it said, taken out of context, and the 5 micron threshold was substituted for what should have been 100 microns. Okay, now why is this important? This is very important because what that meant, or what that means, is that even for COVID-19, that's for the coronavirus, the 6-foot threshold, the 6-foot distance is in a way meaningless, because aerosols can be transmitted for a long distance. So what you need actually is not social distancing alone, but you need ventilation for this. And things like washing hands may be important, but the fact that they can that these particles can actually stay in the air for hours, in fact, is something which was not considered by the scientific establishment for a long time, until actually quite recently, when we started to talk about aerosols. And in fact, you had people like Lindsay Marr and others who were trying to actually get the message across that in fact this 5 micron threshold was not correct. And they met with kind of a wall of opposition from people. Now that brings me back to Albert Einstein's quote, where it is character that is important in a great scientist. And what that means is you need to have a mind open to the possibility of error. So that's that. Yeah. And I move on to vaccination, and again to science in vaccination. That then there's, of course, in the news, there's a lot of information about the fake news about misreporting of news, etc., about conspiracy theories regarding the vaccines and so on. Now, what I wish would be made somehow clear, people, is what vaccine actually, what happens to a vaccine in one's body. This is okay. So, what happens is that actually once a vaccine is injected, or inhaled, it stays in the body only a very short time, in fact. And what it does is it stimulates the immune system, and then what happens is that the immune system basically remembers what the vaccine had suggested, in a certain sense, that way, you see. And that's why if you're going to take a medicine for something, you generally have to take it for days or weeks or whatever to learn. But a vaccine, you take maybe once in a lifetime or just a few times in a lifetime. Because what that does is just provoke a memory in our immune system. It says. Now, it says also, this is something I'm reading from the National Geographic now, that these mRNA vaccines from Pfizer, BioNTech, or from Moderna, for instance, they say they are especially fragile, so they are out of your body in about a day. They don't last. And the body then actually sort of memorizes a kind of blueprint of the virus, or of a particular part of the virus, which then it can actually recognize and encounter. And the process that goes through, the body goes through to actually sort of complete this blueprint, so-called, can take maybe as much as 6 weeks, but not longer than that. So if this process does create complications, that will be within this window of 6 weeks that we have. And that's what we have seen, in fact, here. Now, they also, people say the vaccines are too new, but in fact, say more than 100 million Americans alone have passed the point in their vaccinations where any reports of new side effects will be actually will occur, let's say. And in fact, the side effects generally, which have been found as a result of the vaccines, were side effects which were already known to have been possibilities. And that's why they were actually found very quickly. And you do have in the world hundreds of millions of people who have already had at least one shot of the virus, of the vaccines, possibly two. without any kind of ill effects. And in fact, we see what's happening now with the spread of the Delta variant, the spread of the Lambda variant, is that you have a pandemic of people who are not vaccinated generally. Well, this is just getting this off my chest, but I do hope that somehow explanations of what a vaccine is can reach the general public in time for enough people to decide to become vaccinated so that we can actually get over this pandemic. Now, this is, again, something which is very important, because we find that this is, again, in the United States, you have still great vaccine hesitancy in places like, for instance, Springfield, Missouri. And there you have a great spike of new infections. And in July, in this community, ventilators became just about unavailable in one hospital because they were treating so many patients who had come down with new infections. And I'm amazed that throughout the United States, still 12 states have not adopted any kind of medicated expansion, which was allowed for under this sort of Affordable Care Act. And what has happened because of that is that in rural areas, we have many hospital closures. So you have these areas in places like in Tennessee, in Arkansas, and other places, which had, for instance, a local hospital. That hospital is closed. So not only for treatments for COVID-19, but for general hospitalizations and general diseases, you do not have local health care. This is remarkable. Yeah. Okay, I continue just a little bit further here. And there are just two things. One has to do with Thomas Barak. I guess you pronounce his name that way. And this Heather Cox Richardson actually sort of detailed the issues with Thomas Barak and two others in very succinct way. So I'll just quote her now. It says, at the U.S. Attorney's Office for Eastern District of New York indicted 3 men for illegally influencing the foreign policy positions of the presidential candidate at that time, which was Trump, and then after the election of the United States government. And they were acting in the interests of the United Arab Emirates and also of Saudi Arabia. And now, Barak was a very good friend of Trump, and he's the one who urged Trump to hire Paul Manafort, who was at that time working for stuff in Ukraine, let's say. Okay, I don't really go on for this, but according to the charges, Barra continued to lobby for the UAE up until April of 2018, and the helped turn the Trump administration from supporting Qatar to supporting Saudi Arabia and the UAE instead. And Qatar, of course, was an ally which has U.S. air bases, etc., etc. So it was very odd that the United States actually turned away from them and started to work closely with the United Arab Emirates and with Saudi Arabia, and actually supported the blockade of Qatar by those countries. So we see again how money has sort of infiltrated foreign policy in a very devious and very dangerous way. Okay, one more thing in this. I know I have to do this, and this is just, I think, kind of unbelievable. This is Project Pegasus, which was actually developed by an Israeli company, and it's spyware, which was supposedly to be used against what would you call it, terrorists, etc., etc. No, but in fact has been used by authoritarian regimes to hack the phones of journalists, of different activists, and not only that, what we find is here, this is what the Washington Post actually revealed, that 3 presidents, 10 prime ministers, a king, are among the more than 50,000 individuals whose phone numbers appeared on a leaked list of potential targets of Pegasus. That's right. This is a military-grade spyware. That's incredible. They said that the list included France's Emmanuel Macron, that's Iraq's Barham Salih, South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa, and prime ministers from Egypt, from Morocco, from Pakistan, from the United States also. It's amazing, I would say. And we could be targeted, all of us, by this. So there are conspiracy theories, and then there is actual conspiracy. So now I've gotten this off my chest, and I can turn to what I should have turned to much earlier, I would say, but a little sort of explanation of my ideas about articulation, specifically on the clarinet, but not maybe only specifically on the clarinet. And with that, I move to another place in Marlborough, and we'll continue with this stream. Okay, thank you. And I move now to one of the rehearsal spaces at the Marlborough Music Festival, to talk about the grand topic of articulation. This is something that all wind players, all clarinetists, if you're in the audience right now, think about, obsess about. This is how to have better articulation. And there's different kinds of articulation. In other words, a sort of stopped articulation, or we call it stop tonguing. There's tonguing with the air, etc., etc. Very early in these live streams, I spoke about period instruments and how articulation was actually very developed back in the 18th century, in the early 19th century, and people actually wrote and spoke about many different kinds of articulation, different kinds of ways of articulation, I should say, where different syllables, there's tongue, da, da, different ways of tonguing with the tongue, or using the lip, using vocal cords, etc., etc. And these are all kind of, I should say, sort of baggage, which we can use to enhance our articulations. But now I will speak about basic tonguing and what it is. I should also preface my remarks, and this is most important, just by saying that what I'm going to talk about now, and what I generally talk about, is what has worked for me, or maybe even more to the point, what I believe has worked for me. And what we believe sometimes is not actually what happens, but I do tend to think that what I will explain now is really what I do. Now I say that because if you have very clear, great tonguing, etc., etc., you don't have to listen to me and think, oh gosh, maybe I'm doing everything wrong. Or you can listen to me and say, well, I think that this guy who's just talking now is wrong, and what I do is right. No. I'm addressing basically the people who have asked about articulation, who have trouble with tonguing, etc., etc. And of course, the only way that I can address this is by explaining how I do it myself. Okay, now, since we're dealing with the clarinet, this is very clarinet specific, of course, but parts of it can be applied to different wind instruments and actually different instruments in general. I start with the following, and it's something that I like to think about always, and this is, I think about string playing. And the reason for that is that with strings, the production of sound and articulation are not separate. So, what is tonguing or articulation? Most simply, it is, with strings, the change of the bow. Yeah. It could even be, if you're doing, let's say, down bow or up bow spiccato or whatever, just a kind of interrupted motion of that, this way, of the bow. But it is not something that is outside of the actual production of the sound. Now, how do we produce the sound as wind players? We do it by blowing through. So we have a it should wet my reed, but I'm not going to. Anyway, so that gives you the sound, Now if we were to sort of change, as I call it, change blows, you have to go to, and of course you can't do that because the air can only go one way through that. So we have to simulate the change of bow that we have, the change of direction of bow. And we do that, of course, by actually briefly stopping the vibration with the tongue, by stopping the air, by stopping whatever we do. Okay. So what I want to say now is that we have to feel that the tongue is actually part of the air if we are tonguing. And I spoke earlier about how to begin notes and how I felt that the standard ways of beginning notes, where you put the clarinet, either you blow first without sound, or you put the tongue on the reed, etc., 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 those are all too complicated. And the best thing is to feel that the tongue is just at the vanguard, as I would say, of the air. Maybe I do actually wet my reed finally. We're in this space which we haven't been in before, and although everything seems very easy, it took actually a while to set it up so that we could do this. And of course, my reed dried out. Okay. So the air leads the tongue in a way. Okay, now that's the essential principle of tonguing that I espouse. So that if you were playing, for instance, and then your tongue, that the air and the tongue are the same in a way. So it's not. And a corollary of this is that what is called sort of prepared fingers or something like that is something that I learned, and many people, especially in the United States, learn that, so that your tongue in between the finger motion actually doesn't really work. So you should tongue exactly together. That way. Okay, I continue with this. Now, another point is where to tongue if we're working on the reed here. And what I read about and I hear about most often is you take the tip of the tongue to the tip of the reed this way. And that's something which I actually don't do at all. And personally, I tongue quite low on the reed, this way. If we can see with my finger, this way. Now, why do I do that? There are a couple of reasons. First of all, and for that I put my clarinet down and go back here. It's a little bit awkward in this space, but let's say this is the reed here, okay, if you can see it. Yeah. If you tongue on the tip of the reed, or sort of close to the tip, that's the thinnest part of the reed. And it's the part of the reed, because it's the thinnest, which is most easy to actually get out of shape, we can say. So you tongue on the tip and it goes like this, and then it takes a split second to recover that way. And that actually creates a delay in the articulation. So if you tongue down into the harder part of the reed, you actually don't have that issue. Okay, these are all very simple concepts, and you will see how they all tie together, I hope, as I keep speaking. Of course, I'm totally disorganized, unorganized about all of this right now, so I hope I'd actually make kind of sense. So I come back to the clarinet now, and yes, I'm being admonished to go up like that. Yeah, it's actually good for our posture as well. Okay, and I move now to the different partials. And if you remember how there are different places on the reed. And again, if you can actually elicit the partials without any kind of motion this way, that's absolutely fine. It's nothing I care about myself. I've had people come and say, no, you don't do that, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I keep my head up while I do this. That is something that doesn't concern me at all. This is simply the way I do things. Okay, so I take. Those different partials, which are in different places of the reed. So I use my tongue as close to where I'm feeling the partial on the reed. And so what I'm doing here is, in fact, and I show you how to do this. You take your finger like this, and can you see this? Or maybe I get a little closer, yeah? Here. And there's the connection, to interstice, you can say. Well, let me put this down again. Between the lip and the finger and the tongue should feel like it's almost as thin as a piece of paper. And that, as I've mentioned earlier, the tongue is this fantastic collection of muscles, which allows it to form in many, many different ways. And that's one of the ways, is we make it thin here. And we feel, if this is, let's say, here is the lip, here is my finger, just right in the middle. There, we feel that. So you feel the lip here, and if I go put this here like this, and this is a way to actually sense what is happening here. In order to do that, you put the mouthpiece here, just like you had the lip, and you open your mouth. You're not, of course, you don't play that way at all. That's right. That's right. And if you can see it, the tongue is feeling the lip and just a tiny bit of that part of the reed which actually touches the lip. And what I advocate actually comes from my teacher, Leon Rushinoff, who was not perhaps as radical as I was, but he had this sense that you want to feel what you're doing. That's right. Okay? So you feel where the tongue actually touches the lip and the reed. Okay? And now to recapitulate from what I spoke about general embouchure earlier, which has to do with the E that we need, the fact that the back of the tongue, he actually presses up and out this way, E. and then the front of the tongue pulls down, yeah, that way. We feel that when we're tonguing, we go the. Does that work? Should I do this again? Yeah? Can you see it? Yeah? The. That way. So that the back of the tongue, again, ye does that, and the air actually pushes into the instrument with greater force. And that's very important. That's of crucial importance, because as I found through my years of teaching, that almost all tonguing problems, per se, are actually problems of the fact that the air is too slow, and the reed stops vibrating. And of course, if the reed stops, then you get no sound, and it seems like your tonguing is no good. Not only that, it seems like the fingers and the tongue are not working together, but it's really the problem of air. That's why they D. Okay, and I will speak about this more, about how to have exercise without the clarinet also, which will help our tonguing. Okay, now we go back to partials. You see, so since I'm tonguing, this way, where I'm feeling the lip here, D, and at the same time the E, which focuses the air and focuses the tone quality, this way, the tongue follows the embouchure as I play the different partials. So, that way is really no problem. Something happened here? No. We had a sound. We thought maybe it was the ghost of Marlborough. I know, I'm being silly. So this is essential that we have that the, and you feel the lip. In fact, very often I tell people you should feel the lip and almost not even feel the reed. Because of course, as long as the tongue is on the reed itself, you get no sound. So I go, no sound, because my tongue was on the reed this way. So this is, again, the first step that I have when I teach tonguing. And what's very, very important with this is that the back of the tongue is always the E, and should be quite extreme. I think that E. So, that way, D. So I'm feeling E, so that almost the resonance that I have is coming through here, up here, all the way up into here. So E, that way. And that is what actually focuses the air. A lot of trouble that people have when I first mention this is that they drop the back of the tongue, and then they can't get a gig up. Nothing works. You see, so that E is critical. And that said, I think you have to practice this E without the clarinet. So you walk down the street, and I've mentioned this before, of course. You walk down the street and you go E, yeah, E. Even when you speak, I say speak, I'm practicing. I say practicing, E. I'm also practicing where the tongue is actually, the back of the tongue, I should say, is focusing my speech. Speech. You see, this is very critical. So, I give you one more exercise with this here. And if you remember, again, this early one where you got the with the reed, you do the reed, and then you feel, and then while you're feeling that the tongue is actually stretched up that way, you push it, keep pushing it up, and at the same time, the front of the tongue, you feel your lip, the D. So they get the D. That way. And you do this in the high register because it's more difficult. That's all. Okay, and the other thing is when you're doing this exercise, don't try for short notes. You try long notes, so you don't disturb particularly the airstream. That's going D, that way. And at the same time, this kind of E you feel is helping. Is that English? I'm not sure. But you feel that the E is helping the tongue itself. Okay. Now, small detour about an exercise without the clarinet, and that is and I think I've given this to you before. This is a yi. Yi. Not, and you have to be careful that's not a he or something, but really kind of yi as in yellow, or better yet as in year, yi. So you feel that yi, so that the back of the tongue is actively helping moving the air. So you have something like yi this way, and then when you play, so that you feel that the air is what predominates. Yes.
One more time.
Okay, one more time I should do this. Yeah, here. So you feel that this is what I'm moving as if this is the bow, but I'm feeling that it's the yi that is actually doing the work of my invisible bow. That's here. You can do another way too, which perhaps relates better to what's happening in the clarinet. And unfortunately, I don't have one of these 5-liter bags that can be quite useful. These are medical bags that's air which you can inflate with air, and then you inflate them, and then you can inhale and exhale, and you can feel the rhythm of doing both this way. And you can use that for practicing tonguing the bag. And the way do I put this down again? And the way you use the bag, and let's say this is the bag here, and you start to you use it, go dee 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 dee, and you feel that the bag is actually inflating like this, and not collapsing in between this way. That way. This. Then we can do something like this. Again, I just use. So this is our bow, or our blow, we can say. You see, so that's, instead of doing this way, as if we're playing the cello, you can do that way, sort of straight. I suggest, although I'm standing up, that you sit down, you put the clarinet between your knees if you're going to actually do this, unless you're very comfortable actually holding the instrument with the left hand. I also believe that eventually you should be comfortable actually with the left hand this way, but many people are not, at least in early stages. So I continue with the tonguing now, and with the problem of stopped tonguing, which where you put the tongue back on the reed, and what I've read and I've heard is that this is like a valve, and the air pressure is just constant, like that, and you close the valve and open the valve, so it's like a. And that's one of the things that the clarinet can do very well, which is the alarm, or can do the boat that way, the similar way. That way. But they have very little to do with music. And the biggest problem that I see with this idea of stopped tonguing is that you basically are articulating the end of the note rather than the beginning of the note. So in slow motion, it would be something like this. If I'm playing. That way. I do it faster. That way. So, again, we come back to the air and how the tongue should be the beginning, or I say the vanguard of the air. Ri, ri. So it actually initiates the vibration of the reed that the air continues. And that, if you remember the beginnings exercise, which I did give to go with this, which is kind of a that way, it's where you exaggerate the fact that you open and you do everything at the same time. This also applies to basic articulation, so that it's the beginning is important. But that doesn't mean that there's no place for so-called stopped tonguing. And it is useful if you understand it properly. And this is what I want to explain now. First, if you just are tonguing just the very beginnings of the notes, I have to go up, I know, this way. Even with this reed, you get what is almost a legato, this way. But if you want more character to that, you can actually do one of two things. You use the air from here to actually come out pulse this way, and that is very useful. So I do first just a very kind of leggero tonguing. Again. And then I use this here. That way. And I'm having the strength here, do that. And that is together with the back of the tongue. And I can do that more and sort of get different kind of articulation. That way. Yeah. But there comes a point where that becomes perhaps impractical. And you don't want to go, and then you get a heart attack, you know. Anyway, so you can actually add a stopped tongue to this in a certain way. I don't like this idea of stopped tongue in this. But the way I explain it is, instead of, let's say, you use syllables, the one syllable I don't like for tonguing in general is a T, and especially the English T, because a T in the English language, or especially the American language, let's say, which I tend to speak, the T is aspirated. So it's a T that way. So it's actually a long consonant. So the T, the tongue doesn't come off the T very much. So you can actually have a T which is like a T, 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 T. But it's more like a D that way. D, 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 or a ni, ni, ni. D, 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 ni, 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 D, 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 which are not aspirated this way. They're this way. And if I'm going to stop the tongue, then I would like to think of two different syllables, one for the beginning, one for the end. So it's not like especially, like a tut, 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 that way, where you're just going tut, 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 that way. You're tonguing, you're emphasizing the end of the note. Instead, I do like a din, 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 din. So there is a different impulse for the beginning and the end of the note. So then, instead of playing with a din, that way, din, 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 din. This. And if you're tonguing faster, so that you, instead of going dee, 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 like that, oh gosh, no, you can play. And I'm actually doing both when I do this. So, in other words, this here, din, 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 and the yi is actually very active. But I'm also putting the tongue back onto the reed with this different syllable concept, I should say. Because, of course, we're not actually pronouncing the exact syllable when we're tonguing. But this is what is probably good for us to imagine. So, in other words, that way. And you can practice this without the clarinet by going din 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 din. And the D that you use, though, has to be a weird D for English speakers again, because it's a D that's between your teeth. D, Din, 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 din. So it's good to look in the mirror first so that you can see that you're going din like that. And then, in fact, you can practice. You use the lip here. Din, 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 din. Din, 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 that way. And then you have a that way. It sort of works. That's it, yeah. Okay. So these are the basics of tonguing. So to recapitulate, I tongue low so I feel the lip, and that allows me to actually to tongue as close as possible to the node on the reed, which I am touching to elicit the particular harmonic or particular partial level. So, go back, if I'm tonguing here, that way, I'm one place, then here, I'm actually in a different place a little bit, and then here, different place, here, a different place, yeah. And again, we should all realize that it's always the same. And he goes, these different places that we have are they're like steps or whatever, which do not change. So you don't get up in the morning and feel that all of a sudden everything is totally different. No, you practice so that you remember that they are the same. You see, so it's always that way. And I have to also say that as you go up higher, I'm stretched this way, and my tongue also stretches that way. So when I'm playing, those notes, I can't say that I'm comfortable. I've been playing a long time, and I'm never comfortable playing those notes. Yet, I am comfortable in the knowledge that this is how they work. Okay. So the jaw is like, that way. And I just know that I pick up the clarinet, that way, and I can actually produce very clean articulation with that. Okay, so now there's little more to talk about articulation, and this has to do with fingers. And as I mentioned, that the tongue should be the beginning of the air. The way we change notes has to do with the fingers. So the tongue should actually be with the finger. So if I'm playing, and I don't know if you can see it well, but that way, I'm tonguing exactly with the finger. And in fact, the finger is what is most important. And with that in mind, I always advocate that any tongued passage, I first practice slurred to feel the rhythm in the hand, the rhythm in the fingers, the rhythm in the air, And then the tongue goes with that. And I have a very cute little way of thinking of this, which I tell people. I say that the air is like your conductor. So if you're in the orchestra, the conductor, the maestro, does not indicate every 30-second note that you're playing, but indicates the motion, general motion of the music. The fingers, though, are like the musicians of the orchestra. They do the work. That's right. And the tongue, though, should not have independent existence. So the tongue should be just part of the air and the fingers.
Can you say it again? Because air is conductor.
Yeah, air is the conductor. Fingers are, they do the work here. But the tongue does not have independent existence. Okay, I explain a little more about this, and I have a feeling that I did already, but I don't know exactly. So I'm talking about this all the time. I've been here at the Marlborough Festival, I've talked about that in rehearsals with other wind players. And this is the problem, not only wind players, I have to say. The problem we have is that when we speak, the consonants, actually, they contain the meaning. They contain the emotional meaning also. So I'd say not the emotional meaning, but emotional, that way. All that everything is in the consonants. So I even say consonants. But when we're playing an instrument, the instrument does not have consonants which have meaning. So if I want to do this, for instance, I want to be very dramatic, and I go dum dum dum. Now I do that on the clarinet, and I get nothing. You see. So always we have to rethink what it means to be dramatic. And in general, I always say that the tongue, unless you want to do a slap tongue or something like that, but that's a totally different kind of subject. The tongue should be as light as possible, as quick as possible. And I have to say that even my father, who played the clarinet, was a wonderful musician, clarinetist, and he was a student of both Daniel Bonnard and Simeon Bellison. That's like so many clarinetists of his generation. They studied with those two major players and major teachers who came to the United States, and the combination of the two sort of created the so-called American school, perhaps. Anyway, but my father told me that Bonnard always mentioned to him that you should feel when you're tonguing like the reed is very hot, so that you tongue like this way. It's as if you touch something that's very hot. In fact, we have a reflex so that we withdraw even before we feel that it's hot. So we reflex, and then we feel the hotness, you see. Because there's actually a channel, that's a nerve channel, which does not travel all the way back to our brain, but in fact is localized, which actually responds to this. So you feel like the reed is very hot, so your tongue, whoop, and you go this way. Now, my teacher, Rushanov, also, he mentioned that he never liked the word tonguing. He thought they should be untonguing, because you're actually doing that. And another person who I never studied with, but I knew and admired very much, was Rudolf Yettel, who was Viennese, also a wonderful musician and prolific composer for the clarinet, I have to say. And when he first met me, it's very funny. He met me and he had heard me play, and he said, "Yes, you know, you have really great articulation." And they said, "But so do I." And he does. He was very famous for his tonguing or his untonguing. And he said that the exercise that he liked very much is this. That way. So you're like, so again, this kind of motion that's this way. And what's good about that is that's not no, but m. So you're always going up. You know, if you want, you can use your finger like this. So it's don't do that. But it's basically do that. So anyway, these are different ways of just practicing this feeling that the tongue is just sort of setting off the air this way. Okay. But finally, what that means, though, is that the finger leads the tongue. And for many people, to do this will feel a little bit like you're playing late, because you're used to, I mean, I'm just saying the generic you, of course. That way. That the finger is actually moving first. Or maybe the tongue is moving first. It's sort of in between a little bit. But instead, okay, and this is the final tonguing exercises that I give to people. And again, you do any scale you want. I use the F major scale simply because it's the easiest here, the easiest to demonstrate. And the first thing you do is slur. That way. And not very fast, yeah, but sort of moderate tempo like that. Then you add the tongue as long as possible. So it's almost as if you're slurring. So you keep the air as if you're slurring. And that's sort of longer than you ever will be tonguing this way. And then after that, you feel that the back of the tongue, he is doing that more, and that here is stronger and actually helping, so that the note shortens a little bit. So first I do the very long. And you may notice that I'm not even perfectly doing this. It's a little bit that way, because it's very hard to coordinate absolutely exactly. And I should practice it a little more, perhaps. Well, I do it again. That's better. Then I actually do this yi more. And the note shortens, the articulation becomes more succinct, I should say, but the motion of the finger and the air and the basic way the tongue moves is the same as that. Okay, then the third way is I actually include the din, 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 din to stop the note. Okay? So I first do just the yi. And then that way. So that's a din, 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 din. So there is this sort kind of stopping a little bit with the end. So that the tongue helps the end of the note as well as the beginning of the note this way. And this is general sort of picture of tonguing, untonguing, articulation that I wanted to present. The other thing, though, and this is something I think that I did mention before, has to do with groupings of notes. So, for instance, this famous that way, which can be a little bit of a problem for people. And the problem is not in the tonguing of that passage, generally, as I feel with people. I don't know anybody who cannot really tongue that at a decent speed once they feel the E in the mouth. The problem is the finger and this sense of grouping. You see, so you have to move here, whether you do it one hand or the other hand, doesn't matter, you still have to move. So you have to feel that there is one group and another group, and that the finger actually leaves the tongue that way. And going on, when you're there, the problem there is G sharp. Is that. Yeah. This way. So to feel, and I have water in the key, which makes it actually a bigger problem. This is a Vermont issue, but not only a Vermont issue, that we have this overflow of water, which earlier I talked about in terms of the whole world. It's something that is very, very troubling. Anyway, so here, in fact, I break that into 3 groups. Because one, I switch from first to third partial. And then here, the problem here is just the mechanism of moving from that to that here. And that's why if I play this on a period clarinet, which doesn't have this coupling mechanism, it's actually much easier to play it, because you don't have to worry about the connection of these two things, right here and right here. They have to flip exactly at the right time. That way. So I think that's all that I have to talk about right now. And if you have questions about anything, let me know. I can either address you personally, if I think that makes sense, or I can actually do kind of a second take in one of these streams about articulation. And probably I should do more about combining articulation in different kinds of articulation in an expressive way. But I think that will come a little bit later. And right now, I want to, as a kind of coda, just play for you the finale, the last movement of the Schumann Opus 105 A minor violin sonata in my performance, because that movement really highlights articulation. Actually, I should say the expressiveness of articulation. And I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that you weren't too bored by my meandering discussion about tonguing articulation. Okay, take care. Thank you.